Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year's, is coming up in just a few days. This gives us a great opportunity to look back into time and see how did Jews celebrate Rosh Hashanah and other Jewish holidays in ancient times. Let's take a look. Shalom, my friends. This is Akiva Gersh with Israel in 5, where we give you everything Israel in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, want to keep the conversation going, please do so below in the comments. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year's. It is the beginning of the year. It is a two-day celebration and commemoration of the beginning of the year. And each of the Jewish holidays has its own unique aspect to it, its own unique commandments, laws, rituals to it. Pesach, we sit around the table and we tell the story of the Exodus, and we eat matzah, drinking 4 cups of wine. On Chanukah, we light the lights. On Sukkot, we sit in the sukkah and shake the lulav and the etrog. All different things for each different holidays. Rosh Hashanah, the highlight of Rosh Hashanah is the shofars, hearing of the shofar. The Torah speaks about that. And that's the main mitzvah or commandment of the day. Today, if you looked at how Jews celebrate Rosh Hashanah, they spend hours and hours and hours in the synagogue praying many extra special prayers that we only say on Rosh Hashanah. So normally, let's say during the week, morning prayers are about an hour. On Shabbat, 2.5 hours, 3 hours. On Rosh Hashanah, it could easily go 5, 6 hours. Right? Many, many extra prayers. So one of the things that really characterizes Rosh Hashanah today is the synagogue experience. And there's many Jews in the world who only go to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, 10 days later. Right, and don't really go any other time of the year. So it's basically the synagogue experience. The highlight of the synagogue experience is the shofar. And then they'll go home and they'll have, nice festive meals with friends and family. But this is not how it looked many, many years ago. We're talking about thousands of years ago, before there was such thing as a synagogue. Yes, before there was such thing as a synagogue. I know it's hard to believe that there weren't always synagogues in the Jewish practice, but the synagogue is not talked about in the Torah, and it wasn't part of the Jewish experience for a good 1,000 years or so. Right? We know at the beginning of Jewish history, the Jewish people, the Israelites, had the Tabernacle, as we call it in Hebrew, the Mishkan, and that was the main place of worship where sacrifices and offerings were brought by the Kohanim, the priests, for the entire nation. Once they came into Israel, they still had the tabernacle for many hundreds of years, but eventually a temple was built in its place in Jerusalem, first by King Solomon. That temple lasted over 400 years, was destroyed by the Babylonians, and about 70 years later, the Jews rebuilt the second temple, which also lasted about over 400 years. So these were the main central worship sites and places. But already before the second temple was rebuilt, the idea of the synagogue came into be actually in the Babylonian exile of the Jewish people, because they didn't have a temple, they didn't have any synagogues yet, and they're like, what do we do now? How do we worship God? How do we connect to God? And so the idea of the synagogue was born in exile for the exile. And synagogues first came into being around 2,600 years ago, but it took some time for it to take off. And when the Jews returned to Israel and they did rebuild the second temple, and did had that central worship site again, they still had synagogues. Synagogues continued to exist alongside the Second Temple, but when the Second Temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, the synagogue became the main prominent worship site for the Jewish people, right? A place of prayer, a place of spiritual connection, of spiritual expression, right? So we look in ancient times, Jews were not spending hours and hours and hours on Rosh Hashanah in synagogues because synagogues didn't exist, or they hadn't yet expanded the way that they did eventually, right? So what did Jews back in the day do on Rosh Hashanah? They heard the shofar. Someone in their community blew the shofar so everyone can hear it to fulfill that commandment. And they didn't do work, kind of like Shabbat, right? That is also a command of Rosh Hashanah, not to do that kind of work that, again, we cease from doing on Shabbat. The rest of the day, I don't know. They hung out, they relaxed, they spent time with family and friends in their community. But it didn't look like it looks today. That's the main point. Right? It's very interesting to see how Judaism has changed and evolved over the years, over the centuries, over the past couple of thousands of years. Rosh Hashanah, it was a day of rest, basically. Make sure you hear the shofar, have a couple nice meals, and that's pretty much it. You're not spending the day in synagogue with a prayer book. The prayer book didn't even exist back then. That was alongside the synagogue, in terms of it being created and developed and eventually becoming what we have today. So the main point here is that in ancient times, Rosh Hashanah and the other holidays looked very, very different because they didn't have the synagogue, they didn't have the prayer book, right, that went along with it. It was more of a personal kind of time. I'm sure Jews back in ancient times spent some of their time on Rosh Hashanah, talking to God, praying for different things, but it was from their own heart, in their own words, on their own time, that they made sure to carve out at some point during the Rosh Hashanah holiday. Right. So again, interesting to see how things have changed. In just a few days, Rosh Hashanah is coming up. So wishing everyone a beautiful Rosh Hashanah and a happy new Jewish year. All the best and be well.